I think everyone, unfortunately, will go through something where they're experiencing grief and loss. And not talking about it, not talking about how hard that is, doesn't help anyone. I'm Dana Frost, and I'm 34. So I grew up in Virginia, right outside DC, and went to college there where I met my husband, Brad, and he moved to Detroit right out of college, and I thought he was crazy. I think it was between moving to Detroit or to Haiti, both for a one-year program. And I thought he was crazy to choose Detroit. It was like, who moves to Detroit? You know, all the negative stuff. It was 2005, just everything you hear. And so he moved for a one-year fellowship with a nonprofit here. And after a year of kind of doing the back and forth thing, and we weren't really dating, we had sort of dated in college and just had this connection, and just on a whim was like, you should move here, I'm in love with you. And I quit my job, and it was like a week later, literally broke my lease, quit my job, and followed this boy that I wasn't all that serious with at the time to Detroit. And so that's how I ended up here. Thought we'd be here for a couple years, and then ended up, I mean, it's now been over 11 years, and so this is home. So we started the Closet Confessional 2011 or 12 as a fashion blog. I had just gotten diagnosed, or was in the middle of treatment, I think, for cancer. I was 28, and had been doing online media and working a job that was fine. It gave me flexibility. There were things I really loved about it, but it wasn't the most fulfilling job. And so getting diagnosed with cancer, of course, kind of cliche, makes you think about your whole life. And I knew I really loved fashion, and it was something that I wasn't very vocal about. Not a lot of people knew, but it was this kind of secret passion I had. And so I decided I was going to start just blogging about it and using my love of writing and fashion and trying to just combine it. And at the time in Detroit, there really wasn't, I mean, there was a small group of people kind of all over Metro Detroit, but no one was really, that I was aware of, regularly blogging and talking about and being in the city. And so I just wanted to kind of show that side. And so I just started blogging for fun. And that over the last several years kind of grew, and it ended up becoming a full-fledged styling business where I quit my job and started taking on styling clients and just working one-on-one with women, trying to help them figure out what their best style was that suited their lifestyle and their personality and made them feel really great. And so it just grew from there. I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, stage 2B, which meant that I had certain symptoms, and it was a bulky tumor. It was in my chest, and it was kind of pushing against my organs and enlarging my heart and all sorts of crazy, scary things. And so I was diagnosed with that in 2011, and then relapsed in 2012. And so, which is pretty terrifying. But now it's been 5 years in remission as of October, so everything is good there. I think when you get diagnosed with cancer, you can go two different directions, and there's a lot of different directions, but you either take it and you become a victim of that circumstance and feel sorry for yourself, or you take it and you're like, what can I actually do with this? And there were times I was both of those, so I don't want to be like, oh, I suddenly got diagnosed and everything was great and I had this wonderful, amazing outlook on life, but it definitely put things in perspective and made me be like, how do I actually want to spend my time in my life? And that's why I ultimately quit my job, where it's like, it's fine, but it wasn't fulfilling. It just wasn't, it wasn't giving me the passion that I wanted in my day-to-day life. And so I think when you go through something like that so young, it really does. It makes you reevaluate where you're going with your life and how you want to spend your time and with who. And so that's stuff that did. 5 years after I got diagnosed, almost to the day, I think it was within a week, Brad had some just back pains over the last probably month or two. and he had been playing golf and working out and thought he pulled something, and ended up going through a couple different tests and thought at one point it was a bladder infection or something like that, and got on medication for that, and pain went away briefly and then would come back. And so this past October, October 2016, he went in for an ultrasound and was having night sweats and some other symptoms, and they had ended up doing a CT scan, and we found out that he was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, kidney cancer. 11 months ago, yesterday, Brad passed away, January 22nd. They say it comes in waves, they say grief comes in waves, and I kind of hate it, but it makes sense where there are days where I'm like, especially in the first 6 months, I feel like it felt a little bit more like this kind of trajectory of every day was a little bit better, and there'd be really tough moments, but I mean, I felt like I was kind of always down here with little moments. And then I figured out how to get like higher, and then it would be extreme crashes. And so I think it's a constant battle of how you get through that and live your life knowing that that's what Brad would want, and that we had talked about that, of just not letting this be the thing that ruins my life. And some days that feels really impossible. And I know that I am young and I deserve this big, crazy life. And now I have to do it not just for myself, but for Brad. And Brad, more than anyone I ever met, was going places and was one of the most intelligent, witty, ambitious people. I mean, people would meet him and be like, oh, when are you gonna run for mayor? Like random people after a conversation where I'm like, who does that? And so it feels like, and this is a good and bad thing, where it feels like there's this pressure to live this amazing life because Brad doesn't get to finish that for himself. And also being patient and kind with myself, being like, we are different people and we're leading different lives, and I can't ultimately do the things that Brad was gonna do, but I can honor him by honoring myself ultimately, and just trying to live in whatever way that means.
So where are we, Jeremy? Yeah, room 558. St. Joseph's. That's right, St. Joe's Mercy.
So we had so Brad and his best friend Jeremy started the podcast before he got diagnosed earlier that summer, and we had, they wanted to just talk about different issues in a really real way and talk about just a lot of the issues we weren't talking about. And so they had started doing that, and then Brad got diagnosed, and it was the first night in the hospital, the day he got diagnosed, that his best friend Jeremy was there, and Brad was like, we have to podcast about this.
Why are we here? We are here because I have a tumor in my left kidney.
It was in that moment that Brad, he knew that he wanted to be a person that shared that whole experience. And we had shared very openly about my cancer experience. I had blogged about it, Brad blogged about it. We've always been very open about our struggles. And so it wasn't surprising to me that that's how Brad wanted to handle it, and on such a large scale in terms of literally talking about it in real time and really not editing it, and just, the crying and the laughter and everything. He just wanted it to be out there because we'd been through this now twice, and we both found that there weren't a lot of people our age that were talking about what that experience is like, and certainly not to the level of Brad's diagnosis. And so he's always been open in terms of wanting to talk about the tough things and being vulnerable and talking about emotions much more so than me. It's gotten easier because I spent over 12 years with him, and he kind of pulled that out of me. But I think from the first second he got diagnosed, I think he knew that this was going to be documented in some capacity. It's incredible how many people that just found us through probably Googling cancer and stage 4 kidney cancer, or, I don't know, just people that somehow stumbled upon what we were doing, or maybe followed from when I was going through it, and were aware of our story. But it was amazing, the response and the people that would reach out just saying how much that mattered. And especially as Brad continued to get sick and go through, I mean, there were parts where I was like, I don't want to do this. You know, I don't want to keep talking about it. And it were those moments where we inevitably pushed through and talked about it that we would get the best response from other people that were struggling in the same way, and feeling alone in that struggle. And so I think Brad was aware of how important that was, probably before I was ever aware of why those were the actual conversations that were the most important to talk about. Somebody to lean on. You just call me brother. So we started the Force Joy Project. Actually, Brad and I started it after he got diagnosed, and it was a really tough day, and we were really struggling just with, we both are relatively positive, optimistic people, and so I think it was a really low day where we were both just feeling it and feeling sorry for ourselves. And I was like, I need us to like force joy like every day. I don't know if I said those exact words, but it was like force happiness, or we have to figure out a way to find little moments of joy. And Brad kind of rolled his eyes at me and was like, you mean force joy? And I was like, yes. And the idea of it being forced is something that I think that's why Brad rolled his eyes, because it's like it shouldn't feel forced, but it was more about acknowledging some positive moment when you're in the depths of everything, when you're just at the bottom of the barrel and feeling it all. Like, how can you find some tiny moment of joy? And so we were on a walk later in the day and out on the river, and the hotel next door, they were playing music, and Brad pulled me in and started dancing with me, and it was just the most beautiful moment, and we were crying and we were laughing, and at the end of it he looked at me and he said, there's your force joy. And so we kind of took that, and I kind of took that even then, and nothing regularly. We just, every once in a while, we'd post on Instagram about like a moment, whether it was us singing or dancing or something positive. And then after he passed away in October, so the 1 year from his diagnosis, is when I was like, I want to actually take this and make this into something a little bit more, where it's not just this random sporadic thing, but really this, how do we find the time every single day to acknowledge something positive? Because that's when it was a year where this past October I was struggling the most, of coming into this period of our time of leading up to the 1 year of his death and reliving all the trauma and getting through all the holidays. And it was just this really tough period of my life after 9 months of a really tough period of my life, and wanted to, for myself, just be able to hold myself accountable to really taking the time to find one little moment every day. And so that's how the Force Joy Project like really began on the level that it's at now. I think the key to resilience is honoring yourself. I use the word try a lot when I'm talking to people I love. Like, I'm trying to be happy and I'm trying to get through this and I'm trying. And there's so much trying instead of just being in the moment. And I don't want to break down and cry. I don't want to give myself the space to do that, because that's hard, because that's acknowledging my existence. But at the end of the day, acknowledging where you're at, I think, is one of the most important things you can do, whether it's these really positive, joyful moments that you're just going to feel without feeling guilty about it, which is hard sometimes to do, or on the other end of the spectrum, these really, really low moments. And so I think feeling all of that, acknowledging that that's all okay, I think that's the best way, at least for me, to actually get through it instead of just avoiding it. And because I don't think that actually serves me at the end of the day. Eventually that's all going to come back and I'm going to have to deal with it. So I'd rather figure out how to deal with it and get through it, and so feel whatever it is on that day and in that moment. What I experience every day that has been surprising over the last year is how it's possible to carry joy and very intense grief. And I'm not sure I would have recognized that those do or can go hand in hand. And so I think when you're struggling, when you're going through it, even though there are moments where it feels like everything is just the worst it could possibly be, there is still a space for something meaningful or purposeful or joyful. And my family and I, we call it the pendulum of emotions, where a lot of times it's like the higher the grief, the more the pendulum swings in one way, the more it's inevitably going to swing back the other way. So if I experience something really, really joyful, I'm inevitably going to be reminded of the fact that Brad's not here to experience something so high. And so it makes me feel that much lower, and that's okay. It's okay to feel the whole spectrum of feelings. And even I have 2 projects and 2 Instagram accounts. One is the Force Joy Project and one is Defending Your Life. And one focuses almost solely on grief and loss and really difficult things. And the other one focuses solely on joy and happiness. And I think that's a great way to sum up just every day. We all experience really, really positive things and really, really negative things. And how do we figure out a way to carry both of those together and acknowledge both of those and feel okay and not feel like, oh, I have to be perfect and happy all the time, or I have to be under my covers in sorrow. But you can do both.